Hello and welcome to another episode of Time for Action. This is week 5 of our 12-week countdown to COP26, the 26th annual UN Climate Change Conference of Parties, which will be hosted in Glasgow from the 31st of October to the 12th of November. The focus for this week's episode is key drivers. Our CEO, Doug Morwood, speaks with Graham Ross, urban planner, architect and chief executive at Austin Smith Lord, where they discuss key drivers for circularity in the built environment and the criticality of making tangible progress with respect to policy, procurement, and how we plan our cities, buildings, and spaces. So, let's get started. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy this week's episode of Time for Action.
I'm here with Graham Ross of Austin Smith Lord. What's your position at Austin Smith Lord, Graham?
Hi, Doug. I'm an architect and an urban planner based in Glasgow, and I'm chief executive of the practice.
Thanks, Graham. So I'm interested in hearing your views on how might we accelerate the transition to a circular economy built environment here in Scotland?
Well, I think there's a growing awareness around what the circular economy and the circular design principles actually are and what they might mean. And one can only hope in the wake of the post-COVID recovery and obviously with the advent of COP26 coming to Scotland, that the agenda around the circular economy will become front and centre in terms of the public awareness and sensibility. So I think that will help, but also making some tangible progress with respect to policy, procurement and how we plan our cities, buildings and spaces, I think is absolutely crucial.
It sounds like you're fairly aware, but how aware are you of the circular economy in terms of designing out waste, optimising materials, regenerating natural systems?
I think as a practice over recent decades, we've been instinctively and intuitively aligned with the circular economy agenda and the broader sustainability agenda without maybe necessarily badging it as such. So having an appreciation of the need to be efficient with the limited resources that we have to reduce and minimise waste and loss of energy, and to work with communities and clients in a way which makes sure that buildings are long-lasting, durable, will be cherished and will fulfil and be able to adapt future needs in the course of the lifespan of those buildings and spaces we design. So I think we've been instinctively aligned with it, and in recent years we've become very much more aware and embedded in, I think, the conversation and the advocacy around the circular economy agenda.
Yeah, so I take it you agree a move to a circular economy from a linear economy makes sense?
Absolutely makes sense. And I think that, again, instinctively, when we appreciate the finite resources that we have, collectively, globally and locally, but also the responsibility we have to look after our environment, look after our communities and the ecosystem around us, then I think that it becomes essentially a no-brainer to adopt and move to a circular economy. And I think perhaps the words and the language around the discussion can sometimes be opaque, but when you counterpoint the circular economy with the linear economy, then I think very quickly people appreciate why the continual move to, or the continual consumption of stuff through a linear economy is not a sustainable and long-term approach. The circular economy then becomes the natural way forward. And I think instinctively society will move that way in the coming years.
Yeah, so moving from a take, make, waste, throwing away culture, big consumption, beyond the built environment, fast fashion, a lot of big consumption of single-use plastic, and just throwing away, thinking that the planet will just absorb it all, but we're using up finite materials. So do you actually see a time where we will move from a linear to a circular economy? Is that something that you can see happening in the next decade? I
think it's already been happening. And I think it will hopefully happen with a greater degree of pace and acceleration in the coming years. I think it's crucial, however, that it's done on the basis of being a positive choice and, for good cause reason and for a better quality of life, rather than it feeling like people are being coerced or cajoled into doing something against their better judgment. I think that, as I say, if we can outline and demonstrate the broader societal benefits in terms of a circular economic approach and the way in which that will enhance everyday lives for everybody for the longer term, then I think it will naturally become not only something with respect to, shall we say, consumer choice or the choice of clients commissioning projects and buildings, but it will become, in essence, the mainstream. It will become the natural way of doing things, because why would you take time to win finite resource, use it once, and then throw it away when you should be actually looking to adapt and reuse and remanufacture so that we can repurpose things for the long term?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it is a logical option, or it just makes sense to have a circular business model, or to reduce waste, to design out waste, to not even, we seem to be kind of designing structural waste within the built environment, within, various sectors and industries. But, we have a linear economy just now, and maybe it's not that we don't think it is a logical alternative, but the transition is difficult. Do you think that transition is going to be incremental, or do you think it needs more transformational, for example, radical change?
Well, I suppose that it's a shift in mindset. I mean, the linear economy that you describe is one which has been the default and the norm for several centuries now, but the appreciation over the last couple of decades that that is not a long-term sustainable approach has meant that there's already been some degree of incremental change. Now we can perhaps be anxious and decry the slow pace of some of that change, but when you reflect on where we were 10 or 20 years ago, things are undoubtedly different and have started to move and changed into the right direction. That said, there may be instances where we need to be more radical and pioneer and be brave, but that will require significant policy shift, encouragement from national and local government and investment. And no doubt that will be something that may be supercharged in response to the COVID pandemic response, or maybe thwarted because of that. Time will tell. So I suspect it might be a bit of both, Doug. I suppose there might be opportunity to really push radical change and try and demonstrate what the benefits of a circular approach are. But in the meantime, I think we've got to continue to push and shift and change step by step on an incremental path as the baseline, and see if we can improve that transformation through radical change as you describe.
So you mentioned policy and legislation, maybe a level playing field that could come from government, national and local. You mentioned mindset shifts. What other key drivers and specific examples of these drivers do you think need to be in play to encourage us to transition as a system, as at a macro level, a meso level, an organizational level, but also an individual micro level?
Well, as ever, it's a kind of, you know better than I, the kind of whole system approach that's required to deal with and grapple with so many interconnected and interacting component parts of our national and local policy frameworks, the way in which we plan, procure, design, construct projects, and whether it's city making, place mending, whether it's designing buildings or whether it's designing open space. All of that requires, I suppose, a shift in emphasis in terms of appreciating what we mean by value and what we value in terms of procurement, and making sure that we can develop intelligent commissioning and procurement that make sure that we incentivize and reward and de-risk the right things occurring. So whether that's with respect to whole life costing, whether that's with respect to setting clear and unambiguous targets and requirements in terms of various metrics that we can measure our performance against, and whether it's also about ensuring that the ladder of opportunity for small and medium-sized enterprises, startups, local talent and local businesses can thrive in a way which enables them to engage in helping to contribute and shape the place within which they themselves live, work and invest, I think is going to be crucial going forward.
No, it's a very comprehensive answer. There's a lot in there, and it needs to be a kind of demand-led approach that can be incentivizing the supply chain, as you say, and that level playing field of maybe moving from short-term cost to whole life value, but that needs to be in the tendering process and procurement, in the master planning, as you say, at the city levels and national levels. So, you mentioned local there. Do you think, that local supply chains, local manufacturing, local businesses is an important aspect of being able to transition to, I suppose, a local circular economy or a national circular economy in Scotland, particularly in the built environment?
Well, I think it's fundamental. I think it's fundamental for all local economies across the globe to seek to kind of re-engineer how they've been organised, so that there is that opportunity to remove carbon from the transit of goods across significant distances. The kind of globalised economy has relied on that global supply chain. I'm sure there's a continuing place for that in the future, and I'm sure that we can decarbonise the way in which a lot of that transaction and movement can take place. But of course, the prospect of developing skills, developing and creating jobs at a local level, and ensuring that there is a immediate benefit and impact on the local community through that localization of skills, products and services, I think would be a great boost, but also it needs to be done in a way which is not parochial, which is not done in a small-minded way, but done in a way which is seeking to re-energise and rebalance some of the socioeconomic inequalities that we've got within our economy, and also to upskill and ensure that future generations are well placed to engage in the future economy.
I mean, yeah, no, it's really interesting. I suppose there's a number of things. I was going to twin a couple of questions together. Are your clients asking more for circular innovation and maybe even local supply chain or local services? But essentially, are they asking for net zero carbon enabled by circular innovation more and more? Or are you not really seeing any uptake of that?
It's a mixed bag. I mean, I think in the last 10 years, there's been very clearly a shift towards trying to embed whether it's social value and community benefit, or whether it's clear metrics in terms of building performance or whole life costings into procurement. But it's patchy, it's not necessarily consistent. But some progressive and well-informed clients, and many influential clients, are very well versed in this sphere and are asking for the type of things that you're outlining in your question. But others are maybe not quite as well progressed in terms of their own awareness and policies and ambitions around this agenda. But I'm sure that will come, and that can come through a dialogue and discussion around what this all means, but also the benefits that can bring for clients and for the end users and those that they engage with, and ultimately as part and parcel of their own contribution to that kind of broader social value and that broader circular economy.
I mean, you mentioned COP26 earlier, and that's obviously quite a heavy, I mean, it's the biggest event ever in Glasgow and a big one for Scotland and the UK. And it's not just to COP, but it's beyond COP what's going to happen. The UK has made a commitment by 2050 to be net zero carbon, Scotland 2045. A number of cities and local authority areas throughout the UK have made binding commitments to be net zero carbon by 2030. And the circular economy is a huge enabler in realising these targets. But it's, you're an architect, you're a designer, you master plan, you do an awful lot of, you have a big influence, I suppose, but it's only really if clients are asking for it more and more. The question, I suppose, is do you think the supply chain gets sufficient access to clients and their design teams, like, for example, yourself, to be able to collaborate to unlock maybe the latent potential for circularity, digital, to be able to solve these net zero carbon problems?
I'm sure that things could be better, but there are relationships and there are networks and fora that allow that type of collaboration and awareness to and knowledge sharing to develop. But I've no doubt that we could do more to foster and to try and develop that kind of ecosystem at a local level, so that there is that awareness of local skills, local suppliers, local products, local talent. And that goes right across the construction and design professions in terms of making sure that we develop and support that type of endeavour in a very proactive way going forward. So I think there's some good practice out there, but there's certainly more that we could do. And it would be great to be part of a discussion with partners about how that could be developed and taken forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the global supply chain and maybe avoiding becoming too parochial, but the global supply chain is proving to be slightly fragile in terms of the pandemic for obvious reasons, but also Brexit and even the Suez Canal challenge. So we're seeing, are you seeing any with the work that you're in, material shortages, price fluctuations, or any other disruptions because of that?
Yes, I mean that's very manifest in the here and now. And whether that is a short-term issue or whether that's something that will have a prolonged issue, I think the very fact that it has occurred because of the confluence of the three factors you've outlined, I think points to that need to build resilience at a local level so that we can try and avoid the peaks and troughs in terms of supply, in terms of cost, and in terms of the logistics around ensuring that we can take forward the type of development in the way that we intend going forward, but do it in a way which is resilient and is predictable. And as you say, at the minute, the over-reliance on global supply chains means that there can be some volatility in all of that.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of just in the current programs and the absorption of price increases and dealing with these delays, which are affecting programs and current projects, in terms of pricing for future and designing and pricing for future projects, it heightens the degree of uncertainty, I suppose. And what's behind my question in that regard is, is this an indicator of potential finite resources or negative impacts from the climate challenge that we're increasingly facing? So could this, as you say, be a new norm that we just have to be able to deal with, and that then makes it more sensible to develop that local resilience, as you say? Just on that then, just a couple of final questions, Graham. What do you think are the main barriers in accelerating a transition to a circular economy in the built environment here in Scotland?
Well, I think there's always a resistance to change. It's probably a natural human instinct. So I think the need to raise awareness, be clear in advocacy around this agenda, and outline the benefits and the ways in which it will enhance quality of life. It's not about getting a hair shirt on and having to work through adversity in that way. It's about trying to do things in a way which will help local places, help local communities, and help local economies thrive, and do it in a way which is minimising the negative impacts on our place and our planet.
I mean, it's a positive note in terms of addressing the barriers, but looking at the idea that the circular economy, I mean, it is an economic opportunity, I suppose, and it should be seen more like that instead of, as you say, the hair shirt. So in that case, what are the main enabling factors that you see that could accelerate the transition?
Well, I suppose you touched upon it earlier on in terms of, and I'm no expert in terms of market economics, but when the economics shift to the point where through that supply and demand equilibrium, that flips to the point where it makes more sense to shop local, to have that localized supply chain, then that will, I suppose, drive that shift and enable that shift. But that's somewhat retrospective and reactive. I think that being more proactive, I think it should be about trying to marshal our existing resources, and by that I mean our knowledge capital and our people, to start to redesign the systems and ways in which we do things as an industry. So if that's about pushing forward with even more radical planning reform in terms of how we establish and plan not only our towns and cities, but also the country as a whole, and that becomes then a kind of blueprint, an economic business plan for Scotland, then I think that would be a great way forward. And I'm heartened by the way in which the National Planning Framework 4 position statement and other policy documents are coming forward in that respect. In terms of intelligent commissioning and procurement, there's always ways to improve that. There's some good practice and some good lessons to learn from recent experience. But again, taking an approach that appreciates a holistic assessment of the value that good design, intelligent commissioning, and well-constructed projects can bring, I think is crucial. That's I would suggest also probably going to be prompted by a response post-Grenfell in terms of issues that have come from there and ways in which we look to kind of reassess how we regulate, how we commission and how we procure projects going forward. I think lastly, I think the broader shift, and I would suggest that recent history has shown us that when society calls for and demands for something to change, then those with influence and those in positions of power can start to respond to that. So I think the ways in which the climate emergency, maybe after the fact, but after decades of campaigning, has now become mainstream, front and centre in terms of national and local policy, I think it goes to show you that if society at large and local communities specifically are looking to secure that enhancement and change for them and for their area, then I think that will naturally come. So in the conversations we have with local communities, when they become aware of what the circular economy and circularity actually means in practice, then they start to appreciate that, well, that's just simple common sense. That makes good, clear common sense. So why would you not do that? So I think that getting that kind of coalition of the willing and coalition amongst local communities will no doubt help. And I think that there's some really amazing grassroots endeavour that's occurring here in Glasgow and elsewhere in Scotland that I think starts to lead the way towards that sharing economy, towards the ways in which we can adapt and repurpose our buildings and indeed other components in a way which then becomes something that can have real lasting impact and also provide that business opportunity, an opportunity for people to engage in our industry in an exciting way that will hopefully attract new people into study and learn how to build buildings, design buildings, and how to commission them going forward.
Thanks, Graham. I suppose finally, I could ask you, I know you've been exploring as a company, Austin Smith Lord, and personally, circular business models, advocacy, influencing in the areas that you work. What are you doing at Austin Smith Lord to further that? And as CEO, what part do you have to play in that?
Well, we're a practice who have been around for now over 70 years. But when you look back at the founding principles that the original partners at Austin Smith Lord had, there was always and has always been a commitment to design quality, but also an appreciation of our role as professionals in society and in terms of our impact on the environment. I think for the last number of decades, we have been, as I said earlier on, instinctively and intuitively looking to embed good practice in terms of low carbon design, reduction of waste, and the general good practice and good design principles that you would now badge under the circular design agenda. So as a practice, I suppose we're now at the cusp of changing the ways in which we work. So we've just in this past week reaffirmed our new mission, vision and guiding principles. The circularity and the sustainability is absolutely front and centre alongside design. We are looking to enhance life and environments by design. That's our new mission. But also in terms of the way in which we work, we're looking to reaffirm and refresh the way in which we anticipate the opportunities in our projects with our clients, and then work with our clients and the communities within which we're working to make sure that we are embedding the best practice principles in a meaningful, purposeful way that means that when the projects are then delivered on site and used in practice, that they actually do as they say. And we look to capture data and evidence along the way so that ourselves and our clients can learn lessons and continue to improve not only the performance of the buildings and the projects, but also improve our own performance as well. So it's a very exciting time, and I think that the prospects for the design professions and for the construction industry I think are very tantalising in terms of taking a fresh approach that's not only one which we can benefit from a business perspective, but more importantly, that we can contribute and give benefit back to our communities and to the places within which we work.
That's excellent. Thanks very much for your time today, Graham.
Thanks, Doug.
Well, folks, that was our CEO, Doug Morwood, and Graham Ross of Austin Smith Lord discussing key drivers. Links to both parties' social media channels can be found in the description. Tune in next Friday, where we'll be joined by another guest speaker as we continue our countdown to COP26. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the weekend.